Welcome to the Remnant Trust at IPFW. The Remnant Trust is a private foundation located in Jeffersonville, Indiana. They own over 900 first and early edition significant historical works. We're lucky enough to have 53 of those works here on campus, along with 2 of our own from the IPFW Helmke Library. I'm Dr. Pat Ashton. I teach sociology and peace and conflict studies here at IPFW. I've studied these works, taught about them for many years, but I've also recently researched the particular stories behind these books. I'd like to share those with you. Let's take a look together at the Remnant Trust at IPFW. Here we have the Manifesto of the Communist Party, written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. This was a document that Marx was requested to write by a group that called itself the League of the Just, later changed their name to the Communist League. Marx was in Brussels, Belgium at the time, having been sort of asked to leave Paris. And the group came to him and asked if he would write a manifesto. Now, manifestos are calls to arms. They're meant to inspire people to do what must be done. And so he ends in the very famous phrase, "Working men of all countries unite." This is not an analytical document. It's a document that attempts to inspire people to advance the rights of working people. In 1848, there was a lot of ferment in Europe. Shortly after the publication of this document, there were popular movements all over Europe. Marx left Brussels, went to Paris for a short period of time, and then went to Germany. Prussia. In Prussia, he advocated for the rights of working people, was part of a movement. When the movement was ultimately defeated, Marx was put on trial for treason. Having legal training in college, he defended himself, was acquitted, but was stripped of his citizenship. He left Prussia, tried to go to Paris, they wouldn't let him in there, tried to go to Brussels, they wouldn't let him in there. He went to London, they took him in, and he spent the rest of his life in London as a person without a country. He had no official citizenship, having lost his Prussian citizenship. We'll have more work by Karl Marx in one of the other theme areas, and we'll have occasion to talk more about his analysis. This is a first edition, English edition, 1888, with commentary by Friedrich Engels. By this time, Karl Marx was dead. He died in 1883. But Engels wrote commentary and put forth and tried to keep alive the spirit of this manifesto. Next, we have The Rights of Man by Thomas Paine, who we've seen Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Now we have The Rights of Man. This is actually tied together with books in 2 of our other theme areas, because it says right here, an answer to Mr. Burke's attack on the French Revolution. Edmund Burke was a member of Parliament in England. An interesting guy. He supported the freedom of the American colonies, the independence of the American colonies, but at the same time he was a monarchist. So after the French Revolution, Burke was very discouraged about what went on. And he essentially wrote a book saying, what did you expect? You get rid of the king, you have anarchy. You have the reign of terror. People can't live without powerful authorities. Paine was incensed. Also incensed was a person named Mary Wollstonecraft that we're going to talk about later. She immediately replied with the book, Vindication of the Rights of Man, in which she argued that democracy and freedom are necessary, and strong central governments are opposed to the rights of humanity. Paine, also incensed, wrote his response, which he called The Rights of Man. Published in 1792, as was Mary Wollstonecraft. Actually, Mary Wollstonecraft's was published in 1790. She beat him to the punch. Paine published his in 1792. Next we have On Liberty by John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill, an English philosopher, economist, powerfully influenced by John Locke, who was also a powerful influence on Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton. And we'll be talking more about John Locke because we have some of his works in some of the other theme areas. This is seen as perhaps the best philosophical explanation of libertarianism and utilitarianism. The idea that people should be free to make their own independent decisions. And John Stuart Mill, the British philosopher, provided the basis for that. Next we have another work by an Englishman, John Milton, who perhaps is best known for his literary works like Paradise Lost. But this particular work was a very clever work by Milton. It's entitled Areopagitica. Now the Areopagus is a hill in ancient Greece that was kind of known to be like Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park in London, where individuals would go to give important speeches and crowds would gather to listen. And the philosopher Isocrates, not the famous Socrates, but Isocrates, he was not the inventor of the iPod, Isocrates gave a famous speech at the Areopagus in favor of free speech. So Milton, wanting to reference that, called his work the Areopagitica. It's called a speech, but he never gave it as a speech, because what it is a defense of freedom of the press. So he wanted it printed. This is very clever. He writes it as a speech, but he prints it as a book because basically he's daring the censor to censor it. He said, free speech is free speech. I dare you to censor this book about free speech. And that is very clever, but it's also incredibly well done in terms of him saying, it's not unlimited free speech. We must be responsible. All books should have an author and a publisher, so people take responsibility for their ideas. But there should never be censorship. In the realm of ideas, people should be free to put forth whatever they wish. Finally, we have the First Acts of Congress of 1789. This is a first edition of all the first acts of Congress. And what amazes me about this is you think about people sitting down to invent a country. They had to invent everything about the country. What kind of money are we going to have? How are we going to print it? The post office, the military, the entire executive branch had to be invented from scratch. And that's what they did. And here it is published in this first edition work. Congress inventing the executive machinery of the United States of America. One final note, the phrase United States of America was first used in print by none other than Thomas Paine. The Remnant Trust at IPFW will not go on forever, but the ideas contained in these works most certainly will. I'm Pat Ashton. Thanks for joining me on this tour of the Remnant Trust at IPFW.